I went I went through the partner specific or information that you would need last week, and how you should kind of make your partners do a little bit of work to feed into the application and do a bit of their own research. So it's things like their national context, the reach and the network that they have that you can then disseminate to through your project, and then specific skills and relevance, how they will add value, sustainability. So this is all the kind of information that you need. And once you have that, you are ready to write, but you need to make sure to know what the evaluators are looking for first. So just one second. So a mistake people make is focusing on expressing their project idea and what they like about the project and what's kind of in it for them, rather than showing the evaluator what they want to see. So people often don't look at scoring criteria at all, which is a real mistake, because a big part of successful grant writing is ensuring that you're maximizing your points in as much as possible. Something as simple as just changing the wording to reflect what the funder has put out there, what they want to see, or adding an extra section on something that can make, that just to address a priority that you might not have noticed in your first kind of reading of the call. These are the things that can kind of make or break an application and could be the difference between it being funded or not funded. So we're going to have a look at scoring criteria today for Erasmus Sport as our example. So the scoring is divided into categories. The maximum score is 100 points. And the first kind of criteria, or the first category, is relevance of the project. So there's a maximum of 30 points for this. So this is a weighted, this is a big category, I suppose. So the first part of making sure that your project is relevant is that the project proposal is relevant to the objectives and the priorities of the action. In addition, the proposal will be considered as highly relevant if it addresses the priority of inclusion and diversity. So this is very important. What people tend to do is kind of talk about that this project would be great for them and it would really add a lot of value to their organization and that it would be great for their service users. And all of that stuff is very important, and you do want to communicate that in your application, but you also want to make it extremely clear that you're balancing it with the funder's priorities. At the end of the day, it's their money and they have their own strategic objectives that they want to deliver on, and you need to be able to very clearly demonstrate how your project helps to deliver on their objectives. And this can be, the objectives are listed very clearly in the program guide. It's just a matter of copying and pasting out which of the objectives, well, at least that's what I do. I take the actual objective that my project is going to release, I put it into an answer, and then explain and justify underneath how my project is going to feed into that priority. And I might have one main priority that I'm going to hit, and then maybe two secondary priorities. And just justify and explain why this project is going to deliver on those priorities. That's something very easy to do, that you need to make it unignorable for them, that they can clearly see what the link is between your project and their priority. But the amount of people who don't do that is crazy when you consider that that's a very easy way to gain a few points. And then, of course, we mentioned this in the previous weeks when it came to designing your project. The more you can include kind of inclusion, diversity, a purely sports project, it's not that it can't be funded, but if there is kind of a social element to it, if it's reaching out to people who have fewer opportunities, or if it's reaching out to more marginalized groups, you're obviously going to score extra points there, because not only do you have a sports project, it also has a social dimension to it as well. So the more you can kind of weave that into your project, the better. They also want to see the profile, experience, activities of the participating organizations are relevant to the field of application. So this is the information you would have gathered from your partners, their staff profiles, their background, their experience, all of that kind of stuff, but also your own staff profiles and background and experience. And when we talked about this in designing your project a couple of weeks ago, it's about making sure that each consortium member has a specific skill or area of expertise that they're going to contribute to the application, and or to the project, I should say, and that they have a specific role to play, and that they're the best qualified person to deliver on that role. And they also like to see, I suppose, that it's not essential, but it can be extra points if there's nice diversity in your consortium. So, for example, maybe you're cooperating with a third level institute of sport, or if it's an organization, or if it's a project that's aimed at older people, maybe you're collaborating with a civil society organization that's dedicated to older people. So you get this kind of cross-sectoral input and expertise. So that's just something to consider. And that the proposal brings added value at EU level by building the capacity of organizations to engage in cross-border cooperation and networking. So I think we've kind of gone on and on about this at every session, how important it is that this is an EU project, that it's set, there's a very clear justification as to why this needs to happen at EU level. Like, why do you need to cooperate with EU partners? If you just have an idea that's something that you want to do nationally and you decide that EU funding is going to be your way to do it, and so you tack on a couple of partners in a very tokenistic way, that's going to be immediately apparent to an evaluator. So everybody needs to have a meaningful role, and you need to clearly explain why this project should be an EU project. What's the added value of doing it at an EU level? How does it incorporate, how does this partnership allow you to bring in views and expertise and ideas that you wouldn't necessarily have access to nationally, but through your cooperation with your partners? And how is the experience of delivering this project going to add to your own capacity and your partner's capacity to continue to engage in EU projects, things like that? So you want to make that clearly relevant. And all of these things, this can be a couple of sentences each that you just include in your application. That will just make it very easy for an evaluator to kind of go tick, 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 and give you as many points as possible. The next thing then is quality of the project design and implementation. So this is also 30 points. So they want to see clear, realistic, defined, relevant objectives. So again, we talked about that a lot in the last couple of weeks in terms of, having very kind of clear ideas, keeping it simple, keeping it straightforward, making sure it's logical, and then attaching KPIs, real targets too. So don't just say, we're going to do an event. Like, when are you going to do the event, and how many people are you going to reach, and what's the impact going to be? So, it's about giving something to measure against. We talked a lot about impact and evaluation, particularly at our first session there a couple of weeks ago, and Emily did an additional session on impact and sustainability. So definitely look back at that, and with everything in your project, look at how you can make it measurable or clear or defined. Accessible, inclusive, and open to people with fewer opportunities. So again, that's another opportunity if you can weave in that social element, and not just say that you're going to involve these people, but also kind of say how you're going to make it accessible to them, and show that you've thought about that, and you've thought about the kind of extra measures that you might need to do to make it inclusive. You've got more points available in a separate category for that. So there's an extra incentive there to do that. Proposed methodology is clear, adequate, and feasible. So this is where, again, in that first section when we talked about the missing middle, it's one thing to have an idea. Having ideas are kind of 10 a penny, but it's the how are you going to deliver on the idea. That's what you need to convince them of. So, that's what you need to focus on, is that methodology, how you're going to deliver on this. And it needs to be clear, adequate, and feasible. So sometimes when people see things like that, it can be a bit worrying, and they're like, oh, I don't know how to communicate that. If it's a very simple project, if we're talking about a small project, a small sport cooperation project, your methodology might be like a half a page long. It can be very simple and straightforward. It doesn't have to be complicated. Obviously, if you're going, then your project is getting bigger and bigger, and the budget is getting bigger and bigger, then of course your methodology is going to need to be even more thorough and even more detailed. But if it's a small project, it doesn't have to be very complicated. It just has to be clearly outlined. Incorporate the use of digital tools and learning methods to complement their physical activities. So again, this is something that people might not have, the amount of people, as I said, who don't read the scoring kind of criteria and don't realize that just by adding a bit of a digital element, maybe like a digital learning module or something like that, or a digital event bringing together coaches from around Europe and for networking or something like that, can be added to your project that would help to maximize your criteria that you might not have even considered before when you're originally designing your project. Now, I would warn against kind of shoehorning digitalization into a project that's not about digital. So, you don't have to do this, but it's just something like, really consider, is there an opportunity to add kind of a digital element to a project that would add value? And make sure that you're mentioning ways, like even digital tools, that you're going to use to communicate or to design your project together and to deliver it. it's just something to think about. Is there any way that I can kind of capture those points and add any digital element that might add value to my project? And you might not have thought of that had you not read the scoring criteria. If you're overly focused on your idea, you might not have thought about how to add in these additional things like social inclusion and digitalization. The designed in an eco-friendly way and incorporates green practices. So this is extremely important. All European programs are now really heavily focusing on this. And I think what we see is that other funders are going to kind of follow suit as well. And organizations are going to be expected to have kind of maybe a green policy or something like that about how they're going to make their projects as eco-friendly as possible. So this is something that I think it's worth investing into doing as an organization anyway, if you haven't already. Some of you might have. Because I think more and more funders are going to be calling for it, not just the EU. So this, again, it can be something as simple as a one-pager for your organization that you can refer to in your application, or just a set of principles, a short set of principles, for example, trying to have it as, a paper-free project so that there's no printing or anything like that, or that you have policies around using public transport whenever possible, and for mainland Europe using rail instead of air travel. All of this kind of thing, having considered that and showing that you've considered how to make your project as eco-friendly as possible is important, and you will get points for that. So make sure that you mention it. And you can see that if you hadn't read these criteria, it'd be very easy to omit that because you might not necessarily think of it, but it is very important that you make sure that you mention that. And then quality of the partnership and cooperation arrangements. So it involves an appropriate mix of participating organizations. So we kind of already covered that everybody has a role. It's very clear, they're adding value, and there's a nice, potentially mixture of sectors and expertise and things like that. Involves newcomers and less experienced organizations. So look, I've had projects funded that didn't, not in sport, obviously, in other parts of Erasmus Plus, that didn't involve newcomers. So it's not an absolute essential. However, it certainly adds value, and you can get a few extra points by adding a newcomer. So why not? I mean, that's their way of kind of incentivizing more experienced organizations to kind of bring on newer organizations and mentor them. If everybody here hasn't written an application before, I mean, you can kind of consider yourselves newcomers to being coordinators. So that could be the newcomer kind of element in your organization or in your consortium. But yeah, that's not an absolute essential, but it certainly adds a couple of extra points. Proposed allocation of tasks demonstrates the commitment and active contribution of all partners. Again, it's the same stuff as we've been going on about. Everybody has to have a clear role. It has to be a true partnership where everybody is, it's obvious that you trust your partners and that you're giving them specific tasks to do. I often see in applications, the Irish partner will do this and that and this and that. And it's so obvious that people don't really trust or know their partners that well, or don't feel comfortable delegating tasks to them. So, that's crystal clear to an evaluator. So make sure that you avoid that. The proposal includes effective mechanisms for coordination and communication between participating organizations. So that's just your kind of project management approach, that you've thought about the practicalities, like how are you going to communicate? What's the project language going to be? Are you going to use email? Are you going to use some kind of software like Trello or something like that? How often are you going to meet? What's the reporting going to be like? All these kind of structures. What's the decision-making kind of structure of the organization? Who's going to make the decisions? Are you going to make it together as a consortium? All of these things. Again, if it's a simple project, this could be like, a one-pager of your kind of project management approach. I think we covered this a couple of weeks ago as well. But if it's a much more complicated project and you're in the hundreds of thousands or even millions, then yeah, you're going to need something more comprehensive. But it's just to demonstrate that you have thought of all of these things. That's what they're really looking for, particularly for those lower level projects. And then impact. So this is, again, we've kind of been banging on about impact these last couple of weeks. So it's always about impact. It kind of comes back to impact at the end of the day. And we did a session on that at our first training there a couple of weeks ago. So make sure you watch that back. But includes concrete and logical steps to integrate project results into the regular work of participating organizations. So yeah, we kind of covered this a couple of weeks ago, where there's what the EU wants to do is they want to give the injection of cash that's needed to develop an innovation. But once that cash kind of stops, once the project is ended, they want to see that that it's not just going to die on its feet, it's going to live on, it can be seamlessly incorporated into your core work, and it's going to continue to add value potentially for years to come. So that's what we call sustainability. And they want to see that whatever they're investing in is going to be sustainable. Then there's the whole thing that was called, used to be called exploitation. Now I think it's generally referred to as continuation, where it's basically, you don't just sustain it, you also add to it and further build it. So you kind of want to mention that as well. But you definitely want to, at the very least, demonstrate that the results will be sustainable. Potential for positive impact for people and communities. So you just need to make that very clear in your application. That should be easy to do in the whole area of sport. Includes an appropriate way to evaluate the project outcomes. So again, it comes back to that KPIs, setting targets, considering how you're going to monitor things, how you're going to evaluate those things, and then clearly demonstrating it. Concrete and effective steps to make the results of the project known, and to publicly acknowledge European Union funding. So again, this is your dissemination plan. So this is where, when I said earlier on, you want to be calculating the reach of your partners, asking them, you know, how many people engage in their services, how many people follow them on socials, how many people are in their newsletters and things like that, and kind of calculate it together so you can have a very real concrete number in terms of your network of the combined partnership, but then also have a strategy for how you're going to disseminate it. So are you going to have websites? Are you going to have social media pages? Are you going to do posters or leaflets? Are you going to have events? Are you going to attend third-party events? Just have a kind of clear strategy for how you're going to communicate the project. And then you want to be very clear that you are going to publicly acknowledge European Union funding in all public communications. So that's basically the scoring matrix. What I'm going to do now is we're going to hear from an evaluator. So this is Emma Jane Clark, previously of Sport Ireland, I think up until very recently, but is now, I think, going out on her own and setting up a new company, or spending more time on her company. So Cormac MacDonald of Sport Ireland, who I think has joined us now, had a word with her earlier in the week and had a short interview, and we made this little video that I'm going to try and play for you now. I hope that it will work, and maybe I can see Christine on my screen, so maybe you'll tell me if it works, because I actually don't know if it will in terms of the sound, but I'll go ahead and press play.
We can definitely see it. So
can you hear it?
No, we don't hear it.
Okay, give me a second. I'll just go ahead and
Emma, I think it's, if you have to share sound. It should be when you have the thing on the full screen. If you go to the top, it should be share sound. And
yeah, I know. I just forgot to do that before I shared. So 1 second, and it's because I'm in the advanced share, so I don't know if it's now. No, it should.
How are you doing this morning, Emma Jane? Can I ask you to firstly, if you would just introduce yourself and let us know what your involvement has been in EU funding applications.
Good morning, Cormac. My name is Emma Jane Clark, and I was a Director of Partnerships and Governance in Sport Ireland, and also run Martinstown Lodge. I've been involved in the evaluation of Erasmus Plus projects, ranging from the small scale partnership projects to also the cooperation partnerships, which are the larger fund.
Great stuff. Okay, great stuff. So Emma Jane, could we cut straight to it and get some advice from you? Could you basically tell us what, from an evaluator's point of view, are the most important things applicants need to keep in mind when preparing and submitting an EU funding application?
Well, the main priority is to understand what it is actually is applicable under the Erasmus Plus fund. So if we talk about the cooperation partnerships, are you clear on what the priority actions are, the horizontal actions, etc.? So fundamentally ensure that you're meeting the aims and objectives of the project, and more so that your project fits under this rather than making your project fit under the fund. The fund is basically split, the evaluation is split into separate themes. So it ranges from the relevancy, the quality of the project design, the quality of the project team, the partners involved, and the impact and the dissemination. So a couple of tips would be, is that ensure that you actually are aware of what the criteria are and that you include those and reference them in your application. An example quite a frequent example I would find is an evaluator that people wouldn't include anything about environmental or eco-friendly approaches, which is something is referenced under the SCP, the cooperation partnerships. Also, newcomers. Are there new partners coming that perhaps have less experience or no experience in EU funding? Again, that's something that's will mark you down if you haven't selected a partner or if your project doesn't have that environmental focus. Another thing is that there is a maximum number of pages. That's not an aim or a target. That is the maximum number. It's about quality versus quantity and ensuring that you get your point across in the most succinct way, that there's a really good needs analysis, not the need for the sport, the need for the project, or, you know, very much what is the need, why, or what is it that Erasmus Plus should consider this above anyone else to give funding for. So that's some of the tips.
So just to, you know, that there's some really good, there's a lot in there, Emma Jane. So just to kind of recap, you first of all talked about being referencing the criteria and being very closely aligned to criteria, the policy priorities, the horizontal and vertical kind of objectives. You talked about basically then the scoring system of the relevancy, the relevance of the project, the quality of the partnership. The third one was
the quality of the project itself.
Quality of the project itself, and the fourth one was dissemination, or indeed, you know, so those. So you're saying your scoring would be generally across those 4 areas, like you would score the project around those 4 areas. And is there any particular weighting around those 4 then, in terms of, you know, would it be strongly weighted, or are they just 25% each?
No, they have different weightings, and I would just recommend people look on the Erasmus Plus guidelines and make sure that they're aware of what the criteria are and what the metrics are there. But what I would say is flow, that there's a cohesive flow in the application, that when I'm reading it, it basically makes logical sense, that there is a very clear methodology to the project from, you know, concept to, you know, inception to delivery. That as someone looking at it from the outside can go, okay, this makes sense, and I can see how all the objectives align with the overall aim of the project. It's very commonsensical, but it's not necessarily that common sometimes in applications, that people just throw everything out. So just trust the process, keep to what the question, you know, what the criteria are, and answer your questions based on that in the application form. Okay,
so I think that's all very practical. And so from a kind of a, I suppose certainly from just maybe slightly from an evaluator's point of view, what are the pet hates? What are the things that you really dislike as an evaluator? When you see in an application, you go, oh God. You mentioned one there, which was the length, you know, that you keep within the actual prescribed number of pages, don't go. So, you know, this idea, for example, of waffling on and doing too much, is that something that kind of bugs you?
It does, if it's words for the sake of words, and if they're not relevant. Again, you have, you know, I think it's 70 pages, I can't remember exactly, that you can go to. It's about the relevancy of the information, and don't make the font really small to try and keep it within the 70 pages, because again, bearing in mind we've multiple projects to evaluate up to 400,000. It's just, you know, making it as easy to follow as possible. Another pet hate is not reaching the criteria matched in the application form. So, you know, no reference, as I said, to environmental friendly approaches, no reference to newcomers. People want to help you get across the line. So you have to look at what you can do to make it as easy as possible for the information to be evaluated. And that's really it. I mean, the quality of the projects are great in the main. And also one final thing is, as I said initially, don't try and get your project to fit the fund measure. You know, don't, because that will come across that you're trying to I suppose, tailor the project into the fund, and that you can tell when you're reading it that you're just looking for funding and not necessarily actually have a project that actually this fund would fit, if that makes sense.
Okay. Yeah, that's great. Look at Emma Jane, that's fantastic. Best of luck with the new business, and thanks for giving us some of those insights. You might be seeing a couple of Irish applications cross your table at some stage, so you know, treat them kindly.
Hopefully, we'll need more from Ireland. It'll be great. Thanks a million, Cormac.
Okay, so there you go. That kind of we can hear directly from an evaluator there. I'm just going to, 1 second now, I just have to share my screen again. I do want to just touch on something that Emma Jane mentioned there. She said, she made some really interesting points, I think, about how this isn't rocket science. It's about very clear, logical, realistic, sticking to the point and meeting all the criteria. So it's very much, it's easily laid out there. If you follow all of those scoring criteria, you will do well in the points. So it's not, there's not some kind of dark art to it. It is very straightforward. One thing that she mentioned there at the end, I think that I wanted to touch on, was just this idea of fitting your project around the priorities and kind of finding that balance. And there's a Venn diagram I usually use in my general grant writing training about that. So I think what sometimes happens is that the writer, the project writer, makes it all about their priorities, and what they really want is to fund this project. And so they find a way to kind of shoehorn their project into the priorities of the funder. So it's a very convoluted or very kind of tenuous connection between what you want to do and what the funder wants to do, what their priorities are. And then there's you spend a lot of the application kind of justifying why this project should fit under their priorities. And if you do that, they'll immediately see through that. And it's not, you're going to have put a lot of effort into an application that isn't going to be funded, because it fundamentally does not sync up with the funder's priorities. And then there's what Emma Jane was mentioning there, and I think this is very common and it happens a lot in EU projects, is where somebody looks at the priorities that the funder has and basically creates a project specifically to deliver on them. And maybe it's nothing to do with their core goals or their core work. And it's a very obvious kind of pandering to the funder's priorities and a very clear funding grab, that somebody has created a project solely to get funded. And not really to deliver any kind of meaningful impact in their organizations or add to their core work or anything like that. So what you're always looking for is that kind of sweet spot in the middle, where there's a very clear overlap between your priorities and the funder priorities. And that will be abundantly clear. And of course, you're going to spend a couple of sentences explaining that, but it shouldn't be a stretch for the evaluator to see that there is a clear overlap. If you're having to shoehorn a project in to a particular fund, then maybe that's not the right funding opportunity for it. So that's something that you need to consider. There will be other opportunities for that, and you can come to Access Europe and maybe we'll help you. Maybe EU funding is the answer, maybe it's not. But if you're having to really shove your project into their priorities, it's probably not going to work. And similarly, if you're writing a project for the sake of getting funding and it's clearly not going to deliver on any of your priorities, it might seem like, oh, well, we just really need the funding. But ultimately, that's, even if it did get funded, which it probably wouldn't, because it's very clear when that happens, it becomes kind of a distraction from your core work, from your everyday work, and it actually doesn't add any value. So I'm going to very quickly go over, we're switching around our schedule a little bit. So we're going to go to a case study very soon in about 5 or 10 minutes. And then we're going to have 10 minutes for the case study, and then we're going to take a short break. Before we do that, I do want to just have a quick look at everything that we've talked about this morning. As we're on this thread, I'll just continue. What does that actually look like? So we've talked about the scoring matrix and what they're looking for. We've heard from Emma Jane from an evaluator's perspective, what she would be looking for when she's evaluating projects. And then we've looked at how to kind of balance your priorities and the funder's priorities and know whether this is the right kind of opportunity. So how is this actually reflected in the application form and the questions? So I'm going to go through that as quickly as I can here. So we won't go into much detail, but just look at the different sections of the application and where you have a chance, and they clearly give you a chance to hit every single one of those priorities or those scoring criteria. So the first one then is in the background and the general objectives. So this is very much your opportunity to tell the story of your project and to kind of demonstrate to your evaluator that this isn't just something that you've created as a funding grab, or this isn't something that doesn't fit in with the objectives of Erasmus Plus Sport. So what Emma Jane was talking about there, this is your opportunity to demonstrate that this project arose from a real need, from an identified gap, and to explain how it evolved and how, you know, maybe you as the Irish partner came up with the idea, but then you brought together your partners and you fleshed it out together, and now you have this project and this is what you want to achieve, and you're going to outline your objectives. And it's very important to outline specific objectives in bullet point format, because you will find yourself referring to them again and again throughout the application. Later on, when you're talking about work packages, you'll be linking, well, what does this work package have to do with the objectives? So if you have that bullet point list, it can be really handy. So this is your opportunity to do that, to demonstrate that this project is meeting a real need and it evolved organically in response to a need. Then you've got your needs analysis, Emma-Jane mentioned that as well, and your specific objectives. So a couple of weeks ago, we talked about the kind of problem solution impact approach. So this is a really good opportunity of that. The problem is the need, is whatever it is you're addressing. And as we said last week, you're going to use your sources, you're going to clearly justify that. Then you're going to propose your solution, and then you're going to talk about your impact, which is the specific objectives, the measurable change that you're going to achieve. Complementarity with other actions and innovation, European added value. So again, this is all about, why does this project need to happen at EU level? How is it going to, how do the different European partners add value? And, you know, how do they all complement the kind of the action? How does it complement their existing actions and innovation? How does it link up with other projects that they might be doing? And how does, you know, what's the value of doing this at EU level? So that's your opportunity to address that criteria. Then in quality, they talk about project design and implementation. So this is your concept, which is your idea, and your methodology, that how you're going to deliver on that. Your project management, quality assurance, monitoring and evaluation strategy. So again, this is your opportunity to talk about how you're going to communicate with your projects, how you're going to structure and manage the project, how you're going to ensure, you know, what does quality look like in this project? What are your aims in terms of, like, what are you looking for, an 80% increase in satisfaction with the particular sports program, or whatever it is? You're going to put a KPI there, and then you're going to talk about how you're going to monitor and how you're going to evaluate and measure that. You're going to talk about your project teams, staff and experts. So this is where you can use those staff profiles and demonstrate how each of the partners is adding something and how you're all going to work together as a team. There is a section on risk management. This isn't necessary for the lower level grants. You don't have to fill in that section. But if you are going for a higher grant, you just need to, you know, you need to identify the risks and then the mitigation strategies. Partnership and cooperation arrangements. So this is how your consortium came to be, how it's set up, what's the structure of it, and then the management and decision making. So how are you going to work together to make decisions? So usually it is just a case of, you know, that there's a structure, that there's, you know, a project manager or a project coordinator in each organization, and together they become like the steering committee that make decisions, and then there's all the people who work on the project underneath them who feed into the process. So you just need to explain what that is. It doesn't have to be very complicated, the simpler the better, but it does have to be explained. Impact. So again, we keep coming back to impact. You see that word a million times. So again, go back and watch Emily's session there where we talk about impact in the first one, in the first training of this series we did a couple of weeks ago, and outline what is your impact, what is your ambition, what is your results that you want to achieve. You have the opportunity then to talk about your communication, dissemination and visibility. So that's all that stuff that I mentioned earlier in terms of your combined reach, your combined network as a partnership, and how you're going to disseminate around that. But then also things like, are you going to have a website? Are you going to have your social media pages? Are you going to have X, Y, and Z? So you have to have like a little communication strategy worked out. And again, it's a small project. It doesn't have to be very complicated. The bigger your project, the more complicated it does have to be, and the more thorough it has to be. But you just have to have a clear plan for how you're going to communicate your project. And of course, mentioning that EU funding visibility. And then sustainability and continuation. I've already explained that the sustainability is how you're going to absorb and keep the results alive beyond the funding and continue them. But then also you maybe mention how you might further build on them. Maybe this is just the first step and you're going to apply for another project, or maybe you're going to look at ways of kind of exploiting it nationally and finding further funding and development. So you have opportunities in the application form to hit every single one of those criteria that are outlined. So you just have to make sure that you're ticking all of those boxes, because as Emma-Jane said there, they want to give you the points. They really do. They just need you to help them and kind of meet them halfway and give them what they're looking for so that they can tick that box and give you full points. After that, then it's about translating the work plan, work packages, timing and subcontracting. There's usually nothing new here. you will have already explained your project and all of everything that you're going to do and all of the impacts and all of the results and how you're going to do it. And now they just want to kind of you to translate it into a work plan where you actually kind of divide it out into work packages and activities and designate roles. And there's kind of all these tables that they want you to fill it into in order for for it to kind of make sense as a work plan. So that's not just this narrative document. There's also kind of a more workflow type of a document that illustrates it. So there shouldn't be anything hugely new in here. You should always be referring back to the different things that you've already explained in your project, in your application. So I suppose that's really it. You can see there clearly how you explain what the scoring matrix is, how it impacts how you're evaluated, and where you have an opportunity in the application to kind of hoover up all those points. There's a very clear plan, and in the application it's even more helpful because they give you specific prompts, and we're going to look at that later. They give you loads of information under every question that tells you exactly what it is they want to hear. So as long as you do that, you're in with a good chance of maximizing your points. But before we look at that, we're going to have a quick case study now in a moment, and then we're going to give you a short break, and we'll come back then and look more closely at a question. But for now, I'm going to hand over to Dr. Noel Doyle of Leave No Trace Ireland, and who's going to talk to us a little bit about his experience of putting together a successful project. So Noel, over to you when you're ready.
Yep, thanks very much. Thanks, Emma. I'll just open up the PowerPoint now. So, good morning, everyone. My name is Noel Doyle. I am the coordinator for the Sustainability and Environmental Education in Outdoor Sports and Recreation project, also known as the SEA project. It is a large collaboration with over 10 international partners from across Europe. And I represent Leave No Trace Ireland. We're a small environmental charity in Ireland that promotes responsible recreation throughout the outdoors across Ireland. So I'm going to just talk for a couple of minutes very briefly on what the SEA project is and what it aims to do. So the SEA project aims to raise awareness across EU member states on outdoor sports and the importance of communication and sustainability in environmental education. We want to review the level of environmental education that's incorporated into coaching and leadership programs. And we also want to develop and share methodologies and examples of good practice that have been used in other countries across Europe, and develop a toolkit of good practice that can then be incorporated into future outdoor sports educational programs. So aside from this, our next goal is to disseminate this information that is applicable across EU member states, and then hopefully in the future applicable across the globe. So just going to give a little bit about the background of the SEA project. Yeah, the project was first conceptualized from a collaboration with the European Network of Outdoor Sports. Two members of the board, Mike McClure and Barbara Eidenschenk, had developed this concept for a project, and they got in contact with Leave No Trace with a mind to collaborate, because Leave No Trace itself, we're quite a small nonprofit, and to date we hadn't actually done any large Erasmus projects as a lead. We had taken part in two Erasmus projects before, the Imprint project and NG Europe. So this is the first time that this kind of opportunity was presented to us. And even though it was put into the context of outdoor sports and Leave No Trace's outdoor recreation, it was our ethos on environmental sustainability and the communication of good practices that kind of drew us to the project. So the next thing that I'll say is that after the expression of interest, we met in person with Mike and Barbara in late 2019, early 2020, to discuss the different elements of the application. This is much like what Emma was saying throughout it. You kind of really need to identify what are the key components of what this project is and how it can take shape. From there, we worked with identifying potential partners from across Europe using the Erasmus portal and using the ENOS network to try and identify and match the skills and expertise to what we envision this project to be. So for us, it was a collaboration between the development of outdoor sports and environmental sustainability in protected areas across Europe. So we picked outdoor sports just because it's a freely accessible and in many cases freely to participate. Outdoor sports has a long history of successful use for personal and social development. Outdoor sports and the use of the outdoors also can enshrine a sense of awareness or ownership to make people more aware and protect the environment, because outdoor sports take place in these beautiful, massive landscapes, and they kind of enshrines this kind of belief that they need to protect the outdoors. So it was through this that we started picking our partners who were involved in outdoor sports, but also partners who were involved in the protection of the outdoors. So we have the IMBA, so the International Mountain Biking Association. We also had rock climbers, snowboarders, organizations from Serbia, just to try and get this blend of the different outdoor sports that can be involved in this project. The project delivery, as I said before, it was a large collaboration. As Emma said, you kind of have to break down your project into a number of work packages. We have 5 work packages, from work package 0 to 4. Work package 0 is the coordination and the administration of the project, in which Leave No Trace are the lead organization, and me as the coordinator, which involves the setting up meetings, the organization of the governance documents, the collaboration, and making sure that every other work package is working effectively. The thing that has always worked for me as project lead has been open communication with all the partners. So that involves the setting up of Zoom meetings, team meetings with the different identified work package leads, having open communication with emails and phone calls. I've instigated a policy that every month there is a monthly email going out to all partners, just kind of keeping everyone up to date, because at times when you have a large project over a number of years, you will have work packages that haven't even started yet until late into the second year, and sometimes it can feel like the people in work package 3 aren't involved. So having constant updates and emails just keeps them on track of what's going on. As well as that, every 6 weeks we have a Zoom meeting just to keep all partners collaborating and just keep that face-to-face, because in 2020 and 2021 it's been tough to try and keep in contact with many people. So work package 1, which was the identification of outdoor sports federations and the examination of the issues that they face in regards to outdoor sports. Work package 2, which is the exchange program, where we're in the development of a toolkit of good practice. We've just finished our first Serbia exchange, where some of these pictures are from the presentation. We went to Serbia, down by Nebashta, which is the Tara National Park. And it was all about developing and getting examples of good practice from our partners on how to teach and how to perform outdoor sports in a sustainable way. So this got experts from across Europe to come with us and tell us what they know, and hopefully we can develop at the end of the exchange program a toolkit of good practice. We're getting ready for our Portugal exchange, which is happening in November 2021. COVID had a massive effect on how much we could do. So the dates had to be changed, which is something that you're going to have to deal with as coordinators for your own projects. There are meeting dates had to change, and that's an issue of talking with the European Commission and actually making sure that you know what you're doing, and that changes can be made in time. And it's just something that you just have to deal with. So the development, for us in a practical sense, we found it very important to establish and confirm partners at the get-go. So Mike and Barbara from Enos got in contact with us and wanted us to be the project lead. And then we met with them over in person multiple times over multiple days, because this cannot be kind of quickly done. You need to establish what you want your project to be, how it fits in with the goals, as Emma was saying, of the organization, of the European Commission, to make sure that you're not just pandering to what they want, you are linking what your goals and what your organizations want to create and make sure that it is suitable. We wanted to broaden the concepts of the work packages. So this sounds like something that it's in your head, but it's really putting it down to what each work package will be, who is going to be the best partner, identifying the best partner who will have the range of skills and abilities and expertise in order to complete this work package, and getting in touch with them. But also in that, as Emma was saying, and I'm sure many of you are worried about the actual application itself, we found it highly useful to divide the application into manageable sections for partners to complete. And this did a number of things. I think Emma had already mentioned that, you know, we don't want it to seem like it's one person doing everything. So by dividing the application and handing each application and each piece that was relevant to each partner to fill out themselves, and we use shared drives and Google Drives that was already mentioned, we were able to, everyone was able to incorporate themselves and get involved in the project from the start. Yeah, for us, a key learning was that all partners need to be fully involved. And even if it just involved putting in the piece about who their organization is, their CVs, stuff like that, it's just that constant open communication and collaboration, because that builds the trust and it builds the relationships, because that is essential to the Erasmus project. It's effectively what the heart of what an Erasmus collaboration project is meant to be, that all these different organizations and countries are working together in order to develop something. What we also did is that we defined our timelines for the completion of this application, because while we have multiple partners creating and writing separate pieces of the application, at the end of the day, we left it to one partner, Leave No Trace Ireland, to consolidate all the different elements back into the final application. And so in order to do that, we had to develop the coordination of timelines for when we wanted each piece of the application completed. And that was done. And then we consolidated it all into a final document that could be sent to everyone for final reviews, evaluations, and just to see if anything needed to be added or taken away in order that it matched what the European Commission was looking for, as well as it's still linked to what our personal goals were, and that was very important to us. So advice I would give, just from lessons learned, you got to identify the partners to your networks, your own networks. And you can also use the Erasmus portal for people always looking for to take part in a project and to blend skills with experience. Now, Emma said that it helps if you have organizations that are new to Erasmus. It helps with the points and bringing them along and showing them how it's done. And that is true, but I would also argue that it's very important to have someone who has been through it as well as a partner on the team, because they can show you the pitfalls, they can calm you down when there's stress is coming. So having that little bit of experience in your Erasmus partners was essential. Always connect with your sport agencies. There's many agencies that can help in how you even answering simple questions, because sometimes things can be quite difficult. Divide the workload. So even though you are dividing the workload of the project into work packages, divide the workload of the application into work packages, because it is a large and daunting document. So working together and divides it makes it much easier for everyone. To review, evaluate, and proof your submissions, because even though many organizations are professional and stuff, when you're dealing with European countries, the translation of some of the application pieces can be lost, and there can be sometimes odd mistakes that just kind of affect the flow of the application. So always be aware to review, evaluate, and proof those submissions. Communication and coordination. This project would not have been able to take place had we not taken the time at the beginning to use 2 days, multiple times, to go up and talk to Mike McClure, talk to Sport Northern Ireland and our ENOS partnerships, and work out what this project is going to be. Timelines, have efficient timelines, and I'll even give this little bit of advice, is that don't leave the submission of the application to the last minute. The application procedure onto the Erasmus website is not as straightforward sometimes as you might think. It's not as intuitive as you might think. So if if I was being, I would say you give at least a week when you have everything together to make sure that everything goes up onto the platform correct, because you do not want to be struggling on the last day to upload the last bit and making sure. So give at least a week of time free to make sure that the application goes through the Erasmus portal correctly, and have a lead applicant consolidate into the final document with the assistance of everyone else. So the project will have a project coordinator, but also have a lead applicant to make sure that the application goes through smoothly. Some other advice that if every application goes through successfully and it's great, I have some other advice. Number one, the course coordinator or the lead applicant, just be aware that you will be the one that the European Commission will discuss with. You are the coordinator, you are in charge of the project. And just from a financial point of view, just be in contact with your financial department, because the funding goes directly to you. So, and then you disseminate the funding to the partners. So that's a very important thing just to be aware of, because it can be quite a substantial amount of funding that then you need. So your financial department might be going a little crazy as where did all this money come from? So you just need to have that set in place in order that you can then exchange it with the partners. The main learning that we had was projects like this, it was essential to have good governance and policies set in place with all of our partners and agreed before it could take place. So we developed partnership agreements, we developed code of ethics governance policies that you might not have developed, you might have developed for your organization, but we also felt it was important to develop it specifically for the project, just so everyone is aware of what is happening. Everyone is aware of agreed set of, this is the code of conduct, this is our governance code, this is our risk management. So this was part of my job, is making sure that every partner is aware of the organization and what needs to be done. Aside from that, I think I'll stop there. If anyone has any questions, feel free to let me know, or if I've gone too fast and you want me to go over anything at all, happy to.
No worries. Thank you very much, Noel. No, that was great. Go ahead, Cormac. Sorry.
No, thanks a million, Noel. Just to acknowledge the fact that Sport Ireland is obviously a partner of Leave No Trace Ireland, but it's a superb project, and just to thank Noel for I suppose his work on the project, but also giving us a comprehensive overview of pretty much beginning and indeed in project. I know that Noel was in Slovenia last week, or maybe some other European country, I think, and he's off again in November. So that's the positive side of the project, of course. You're able to go and have your visits into different countries, seeing different areas, working and meeting and having cultural exchanges with your partners, and also doing your work as well, you know. So I think that's a kind of an important dimension to it. You're getting some very nice photographs in the background there, Noel, of different locations that no doubt that you're doing mobile workshops in and collaborating with, you know. So excellent work, but really practical advice there. Really interested, obviously, hearing more about just that groundwork that you were doing around MOUs and partnerships and governance piece to just that. And I know that for big projects, that's the kind of, I suppose you might call it, that's the type of due diligence that you might be looking at. You know, you're looking for real partner buy-in. Obviously, for smaller projects, you know, it may not be as intense, I think, you know, if the partnerships are much tighter, one or two partners are more, you know, and projects are much smaller, well, then the amount of governance maybe can be scaled accordingly. Would you concur with that?
Yeah, absolutely. We have 10 international partners, and like they would all have their own code of governance and code of ethics and their own policies on data use and stuff. So it was for me, we wanted just to make a single, you know, for this project, this is the code of ethics for this project. And it wasn't us saying, this is the law, you now must sign it. This was built with them. You know, I'm not just saying, here, we're the coordinator, you must do this. It was like, hey guys, we're drafting up this code of ethics policy. This is our complaints policy. You know, if there is an issue. And it even goes down to for a financial management policy, because it becomes, you know, we were like when we were awarded the funding, you know, all the 70% of the funding was awarded to us straight away. And you know, that's major warning lights for for the financial department of the organization. Is like, where did this come from? So we needed to have all these things in place to say, no, everyone relax. This is how it happens. This is the money going out. And we wanted to make sure that the partners knew when exactly they were getting their portion of the funding, which is a thing, because we didn't want to give them all of the money straight away. We wanted to make sure it was proportioned and make sure that this was agreed on with our partners. So for smaller organizations and smaller collaborations, I'm sure it can be tailed back a little bit, but if you're going larger, this project wouldn't have worked if we didn't have these clear guidelines of who's doing what, who's doing when. If there is a problem, this is what happens. If these are the risks that are associated with it. The risk register was a major one for us, because we had to develop and identify risks. And one of the risks which occurred was COVID. COVID was a risk that, although it wasn't a major impact to the project, it was something that we had worked on with the partners, that if COVID made starting the exchange program, which was meant to begin in June, what occurs. And then as my job as the coordinator was talk to the European Commission and say, what can we do? And the option was to just reschedule. And that's what we did. We instead of starting in June, our exchange program began in September. And the way we did that is we talked to each of the hosts of the work package of the exchange program and say, when can you actually still do this exchange program, but still showcase the sports and the activities that you want to showcase? So we had to change around the order. So Serbia was okay, but we had to change around the order. So Portugal is in November, we're going, and then Sweden is in February, France in March. But we still were able to do this and then keep the final deadline of Ireland in June 2022 intact. So it's always open communication, developing this trust from the get-go. And even in the application phase, even if you have a smaller partner who doesn't have too much to do with the application, if you can get them to incorporate who their organization is, their CVs, and just put that in, it gets people talking and gets people communicating. And for me, the monthly emails, every 6 weeks, we have a Zoom call just going through all the work. We have our steering committee meetings. So it's just that constant trust, and I know people are getting Zoom fatigued nowadays, but it's just kind of keeps that face-to-face. And that's what's important for us.
Great stuff, Noel. That's great stuff. I mean, there's a couple of questions coming in there on the chat boxes. Maybe Christina and Emma and Emily might pick up on some of those. There's kind of obviously a couple of requests there for different templates, but I think there's just a lot of information that Noel has touched on there. Just a question. You would have worked on a lot of this, Noel, once you received notification that you were successful in the application. So that really is the Kickstarter for, okay, now we've actually got, we've been funded. Now we can actually, did you do some of these governance and policies and code of ethics documents and agreements? Did you do that in advance in the lead up to when you were preparing the application?
Yeah, so we had our official project kickoff meeting in February 2021, but we were given notification that the project was successful in late October, November 2020. So as coordinators and for myself personally, I wanted to get working with the different work package leaders and the different partners as soon as possible. So we had 3 meetings actually in the months of October to December, just getting in touch with them. And we would send drafts to different work package leaders just to get their reflections on, governance policy should be this, code of ethics policy. What do you think of this? Is there anything on your side that should be used? The data security policy was one that was kind of suggested as well. And the risk registers, we kind of just had to sit down over Zoom with the work package leaders and kind of go through the different risks and how we can assess these risks and at what level will these risks affect the worst case scenario. You know, part of a coordinator's job is to be the doom and gloom of Erasmus projects, that you have to keep looking at what can go wrong and how do we fix this. So if something does happen, it can be addressed quickly.
Okay. Cormac, I'll have to put it there because we promised them a break 10 minutes ago. So we're going to take a bit of, no worries, no, thank you very much for all of that. That was really, really useful. And I think it's very handy to see that kind of first-hand insight. And I've addressed the questions that came up there in the chat around templates and things like that. So definitely reach out to Access Europe and we'll help as much as we can. But we're going to go ahead and take a break until we'll say until like 16 minutes past. It'll have to be 5 minutes, I'm afraid, because otherwise we'll go over. Sorry about that. So we'll go ahead and pause there for 5 minutes. I'll see you about 16, 17 minutes past, say. Okay, thanks everybody. Okay, I think we can all start to come back now, or we might get started anyway, and people can filter back so that we can finish on time. So we're going to jump in now. Our next step is to quickly look at some general grant writing rules. So we've kind of covered a lot of the details of Erasmus Plus. Thankfully, this next section is a little bit shorter, so that's good. We should be finished on time. And we've covered a lot of the kind of heavy stuff so far. So now we're going to look at some kind of general rules when it comes to grant writing, just best practice. And then we're going to have a look at a specific method that you can use when it comes to answering questions to kind of help break them down and make it simpler. And we're going to take a look at a specific example from Erasmus Plus Sport of a question and show how we would answer that. So let's have a quick look at these general rules first and foremost. So general grant writing rules when it comes to communicating your project. I mean, I think we've said this enough, so I won't continue to labor the point, but that European dimension is key. At all times, you want to be building in, why is this a European project? How does it relate to European policy? How does it relate to the program? All of that, you want to make that unignorable throughout your application. Again, this is going to be very reiterative of everything that we've covered so far, just so that you know, because the principles are the same, regardless of whether it's an EU grant or otherwise. But it's not about you. You have to continuously bring it back to the funder's priorities. How are you going to be delivering on the funder's priorities? Specifically quote the priorities in the application that your project will help to address, and make it abundantly clear that your project is closely aligned to their priorities. Sometimes people have a tendency to kind of go on and on about how this project is going to be great for them, but they don't demonstrate how it's going to help the funder to deliver on their priorities. So make sure that that's very clear. Again, we've heard this over and over again. Some of you might have heard of the KISS principle. It's keep it simple, stupid, or keep it stupid, simple. Make it as clear and as straightforward as possible. There is a thing that people do sometimes, it's usually in project management, but it can be in project design as well. It's called gold plating. It's where they get an idea and it's a great idea, and then they kind of get overexcited and they're like, oh, and then we could do this, and maybe we could add this, and maybe we'll add this other thing. And before you know it, you have this kind of Frankenstein's monster of an idea that's just really complicated. Like, you know, the person might get the original idea, but the more you add to it, the more complicated it becomes, and the more difficult it is to follow from an evaluator's perspective. And also the more unrealistic it seems, because you're not going to be able to do all of this within the time frame. So always keep it simple. See the project as the first step in an overall European development plan, and make it very realistic. Be specific. So we've talked about that a lot over the last couple of weeks. You need to be specific about your target groups, specific about your KPIs. Don't leave anything too general. Make sure that the evaluator has something to kind of sink their teeth into, that it's not all very vague and woolly and talking about things that are going to happen, but not giving any real metrics for how you're going to measure that and how you're going to know if it happens and how it's going to work. That kind of comes back actually to the next one that we talk about as well, around invoking your inner toddler, but I'll get to that. Read and answer the question. I think if anybody remembers back to the Leaving Cert, I remember the teachers used to say that all the time. Answer the question, answer the questions. The amount of times I've reviewed applications and, you know, you read an answer and it's a great answer, it's a lovely answer, but it's not the answer to the question that they were asked, where they obviously just scanned the question, you know, took maybe 1 or 2 words out of it and then wrote their idea of what they wanted to say about this, or they didn't know how to answer the question, so they kind of made up their own question to answer, more or less. So it's absolutely essential that you read and answer the question. And there are lots of hints that the evaluators give you, or that the people who design the application give you, to try and help you to answer the question best. And we are going to look at that, and we're going to look at a thing called the keyword method now in a moment that will help you to do that properly. Understanding the whole picture. So again, this is, I think I talked about this a couple of weeks ago. It's the how, why, when, where, you know. Whenever you're talking about doing a project activity, you should be able to answer all those questions. If you can't answer those questions, then you have to ask, well, how are you going to actually deliver this if it did get funded? You know, you need to know the answers of, you know, why is this thing happening? When is it going to happen? Who's going to do it? How are you going to do it? How are you going to know if it works? All that kind of thing. So it's just about asking yourself all of those questions. And if you have actually asked yourself those questions before you even try to fill out the application, and you know all the answers to that before you even touch it, it will make it so much simpler of a process, because then you're answering questions that you already know the answer to, as opposed to trying to make this up as you go along as you're writing the application. And that's where it can get very unwieldy and kind of messy. Use reputable sources and quote their own policy back at them. We covered that a lot during the designing your project session that we did a couple of weeks ago, and make sure it's very easy to just Google, you know, what is the EU's policy about sport, or what is the EU policy about inclusion in sport, or anti-racism in sport, or, you know, engaging older people in physical activity for health. Like they have a policy for everything. So absolutely tie it to the program guides and the program priorities and everything, but it's also no harm to use their own policy as context and demonstrate how your project is going to help to deliver on that. So that's just the general communicating your project rules. Then when it comes to just general good practice in writing, this is just, so things like mirroring their language. So for example, these are mainly kind of psychological, to be honest, like in terms of what appeals to people as they're reading. So mirroring language is, you know, making sure that you're using the same terminology as them. You know, it might just be just adjusting your language a little bit so that's closer to them, makes the evaluator feel that you're understanding each other and that you're on the same page. Obviously, you don't want to copy and paste whole blocks of text. That would, you know, there's a bit of a balance, but you just want to make sure you're using the same kind of terminology that they're using, so that it kind of creates this shared understanding, or a feeling of shared understanding with your reader. Assume that the reader knows nothing. So I think we kind of mentioned that earlier on as well, maybe, but it was basically, you know, you want to avoid jargon, you want to define abbreviations. Oh, I think it was, yeah, when Emma Jane was speaking, like, make it clear, make it easy for them. Don't have them have to look up abbreviations or terminology or, you know, jargon or anything like that's, you know, they've got hundreds of these to read. You want to make it as absolutely easy to read as possible, and assume that you know, that the person who's evaluating your application might not know very much about your sport specifically. So don't, you know, it can be no harm to get somebody, an outsider, to kind of read it and make sure that it makes sense for them, and make it as clear as possible. And also assume, like, just because you understand that something is a problem because you work very closely with something all day every day, they might not understand that, and they might need you to prove that and to use sources to demonstrate why this is a problem. So you always have to assume that the reader knows nothing and kind of approach the application like that. Using the active voice. So this is just, again, good practice in writing, but especially persuasive writing. It's very important. So the active voice is, we will create a new program, versus the passive voice, which is, a new program will be created. So you can see the difference between those sentences. When you say a new program will be created, that kind of seems like you're almost trying to distance yourself from the responsibility. It's almost like, well, you know, somebody will do it, you know, it will get done. It doesn't imply kind of ownership and leadership and confidence, versus we will create a new program. It requires confidence. So these things might not seem important, but they do make an impression as somebody is reading through an application. We know this. We know that that's why professional grant writers will have higher success rates than somebody who might be an absolute expert on the topic, but just doesn't know how to write persuasively really well. So in a similar vein, then you want to remove what I call watery language, like we think, we believe, we feel. If you ever send me an application to review, I will immediately delete all of that, because it just looks so bad. It's, you know, you're trying to convince the funder that you're an expert, that you have authority on this topic, and that you are the best person to possibly lead this. So, you know, if you say, oh, we think this is a problem, no, like, you're the expert, this is a problem. Or we believe our solution will work. No, our solution will work. Okay, so there's the difference in that kind of confidence and assertiveness that does make a difference to how people read an application. Plus, it's just redundant language. It's just bad practice in writing anyway, to kind of include these things. It doesn't add anything to the sentence. And everything you say should be rooted in evidence anyway. So there should be no room for conjecture, like we think, we believe, we feel, stuff like that. Headings, subheadings, bullet points, avoid blocks of text. So again, that kind of harks back to what Emma Jane said earlier about make it as easy, like, you know, evaluators are people too, as we saw, and they have hundreds and hundreds of pages to read. You will ingratiate yourself to them if you just make it a little bit easier on them. Like, nobody wants to read a wall of text and try to pick out, you know, did they reach that criteria? Make it abundantly clear that you did address the criteria, and you can do that by using headings, subheadings, bullet points, and we'll look at that now in a moment with this kind of keyword method, looking at an example. And then proofread. So again, I mean, nobody's going to mark you down for a typo or you know, spelling mistake or anything like that. So it's not necessarily that you're going to lose loads of points, but it does make it easier to read. And the easier you can make it to read, the more you'll ingratiate yourself to your evaluator. And it does, you know, it just makes it look a bit more professional and tidy. And again, you're trying to communicate this kind of confidence and professionalism. So it can be really helpful. It's very hard to proofread your own work. So it can be very helpful to get another person to proofread it for you and allow plenty of time for that. So that's that. And we're going to look at the keyword method now. So this is a method that helps you break down long application questions, and the EU is quite famous for giving you very long application questions to ensure that you are hitting all of the key points necessary to maximize your score. So just to say that they give you these long questions because they're trying to give you loads of clues. They're giving you the exact things that they want to see. And we look at that now with an example question. So even though sometimes the long questions can be a bit of a pain, they are actually trying to help you. So let's look at an actual example from the application, from the sports application. So under the communication, dissemination and visibility of funding section, you are asked to describe the communication dissemination activities which are planned in order to promote the activities/results and maximize the impact. Parentheses, to whom, which format, how many, etc. Close parentheses. Clarify how you will reach the target groups, relevant stakeholders, policymakers, and the general public, and explain the choice of dissemination channels. Describe how the visibility of EU funding will be ensured. So you can see that in that question, there's actually 3 very distinct questions. And within that, they are asking for multiple things. So you would be very, you know, if you just talk about, we're going to disseminate, we're going to create a web page and we're going to do this and that, I mean, that's not answering their question. You know, you might just write a paragraph on dissemination and, you know, that's not what they asked. They also asked about how are you going to use it to maximize impact? What formats are you going to use? What channels are you going to use? Who are your target groups? How are you going to reach these specific people? And how are you going to deliver on the visibility side of things? So in this method, we use keywords as headings as much as possible, because that makes it unignorable. When an evaluator will be looking for, did they mention their target groups? Did they mention their dissemination channels? Did they mention, you know, their visibility of EU funding? And if you do that with headings, it makes it extremely easy for them to tick those boxes and make sure it's not buried in a paragraph somewhere. It's not easy for them to miss. It's abundantly clear that you did actually reach that. So looking at that question, you know, you can kind of see which terms would you underline? What would you use as your headings? So I won't, because we don't have a lot of time, so I'm not going to linger too much, but, you know, you might mentally pick out a few phrases there and you can see if you were right. So let's have a look. This is what I would, and again, this is an exact science. So this is what I would have underlined. So if I'm filling out this application, I'm going to be right. I need to have a heading about communication dissemination activities. I need to have a heading about impact. I need to have a heading about target groups. I need to have a heading or just address in some way dissemination channels. And I need to have a specific section on visibility of EU funding. So not all of them have to be headings, but they could be like, you know, nestled within a heading, but we need to have clear points on all of these things. And they don't have to be in that exact order or anything. You can order them into a logical way, but you definitely want to make sure that you are mentioning all of these things. That's very important. So here, and you know, you can see that I really struggled to fit this into a slide. So you can have a closer look at it more comfortably later, you know, where it's easier to read. But this would be how I might answer that question. So the first thing I do to define the target groups, because that's who we're going to be communicating to. So the primary target groups could be, for example, you know, if it's a project about, you know, training coaches to work better with young people with fewer opportunities age 12 to 17. So that's how exact you need to get. You have your primary target group be very exact. And then your secondary one are all the people like other sports organizations who could utilize your project, potential multipliers and policymakers, for example, regional and national sports bodies. So this is just an example. This isn't a, you know, follow this guide exactly. This is just an example of how you might define your target groups. And to be honest, you would have probably already earlier on in the application defined who your target groups are. So you're kind of reiterating them here. Then you're going to talk about your communication dissemination activities. So you're going to have different, so if you look, what did they say? So they wanted communication and dissemination activities, and then they wanted impact, but they also wanted you to include things like to whom, which format, how many, etc. So I'm talking it here, I'm like, okay, let's talk about format first. So we have online, we're going to have all these methods, and our target group, or our target, sorry, that shouldn't say target group, that should say target. So how many people do we want to reach through that? I will fix that before I circulate these notes. So we want to reach X amount of people through our online channels. Face-to-face, we have all of these things. Potentially, you don't have to have all of them, but you could potentially use these types of things for face-to-face. And you're going to reach X amount of people through that. And then using multipliers, for example, stakeholder networks at national and EU level, and you're going to reach X amount of people through that. And then you're going to explain how the combined network, we mentioned that earlier, that we're going to ask your partners how many people they reach on a regular basis. And you're going to say, combined, the partners have access to 10,000 people within our networks. And this includes X amount through social media, X amount through newsletters, X amount through our websites, X amount through events and things like that. And these are all channels that we have at our disposal that we can use to disseminate the project. Then you're going to talk about the impact of all of that. What is the goal of dissemination? What difference will it make? For example, you might say mainstreaming project outputs and results, sharing learnings, gathering feedback for further project development. All of this is usually what people want to do when they're talking about impact or when they're talking about dissemination. That's the purpose of it. That's the impact that you want to make. How many people do you want to reach in total? So combining all of this kind of stuff. Who will measure and report on the impact? So maybe you could put a partner who is in charge of dissemination. When we talk about doling out the roles, maybe one partner is in charge of monitoring dissemination for the whole project. So they take all of these targets and they create a method for reporting. We actually have a method of Access Europe that we can share with you if you do need it. But that they can use to kind of monitor and gather and make sure that people are collecting evidence of their dissemination, that you're recording it and making sure that you're on track throughout the project. And so you might describe that, oh, such and such partner is going to be in charge of that for this project. Here is their person who's going to monitor it, and here is their relevant experience. So again, that just kind of reassures the evaluator, okay, they've really thought about this and this is in really good hands. And then visibility of EU funding. So you're going to make sure that you put that as a heading so that they can't miss it. And you're going to say acknowledgement of EU funding will be highlighted in all project communications in line with funder requirements. So you could just say something as simple as that. Partner in charge of dissemination, whoever that is, will ensure that this is implemented and monitored throughout the project. So that's how you might, and you can see, what does this help do? Like, what does this keyword method help do? It helps you to make sure that you're answering the question, that you're highlighting all of the main bits that they're asking for and making sure that you address them. In as much as possible, you're going to put them into headings, or you're going to highlight them as a subsection or a subheading, or make sure that they're mentioned and integrated in some way. It avoids blocks of text. I mean, if this was just one big slide full of text with no headings, no bullet points, it would be an awful lot harder to read and to scan. And it encourages you to be clear and be specific. So if you can take every question like that, reading it, highlighting what exactly it is that they're asking you, and structuring your answer in such a way that you can show that, that's what you're aiming to do at all points. If you do that with every single question, you will be on a good track. That will already bump up your score so much, because you will have been meeting all of the criteria. You're being clear, you're being methodical, you're being easy to read, and you're addressing all of the points. So there is also a opportunity to look at work packages. I am going to share one of those now in a moment with you. I just created kind of a template of a work package with example meetings and reports and stuff like that. So you'll be able to see that. I'll show it to you now in a minute. Before I do that, because I'll have to switch screens, because I couldn't possibly fit that into a slide. So I created it as a separate Word document that I will circulate to you afterwards so that you can see it as an example, and I'll show it to you now in a minute. But before that, before I switch to that, I just wanted to just give you a quick warning that we will be doing a Q&A very shortly. So if you have questions, type them into the chat box now, and we'll have a few minutes at the end to address any questions. And then also this is definitely reiterating stuff that you've already heard in previous weeks, but and even from Noel today. But just to reiterate that, the next step, once you've completed your first draft, you're going to do draft circulation. So you're using a cloud-based system, joint responsibility. So like what Noel said there about, doling out responsibility for writing out certain sections can be really good. But at the same time, you do want to avoid a kind of too many cooks situation where you know, multiple people are weighing in on every question, and it just becomes a bit of a mess. So like, have nice defined sections if you're going to dole out that responsibility, and then make sure that you have somebody to edit it at the end and make it cohesive and make sure that it flows and makes sense, because, you know, it can sometimes be very obvious if multiple people wrote a document. Make sure that you allow for 2 rounds of circulation, first round for them to give feedback, second round for them to get their final sign off and any last things before you do your third one. Allow for feedback, all that kind of thing. Make sure each partner understands and agrees to their role. So that is where something like an MOU can come in, to make sure that they absolutely understand what they're taking on with this project. There's no excuse for them to turn around once it's funded and be like, oh, well, I didn't know that that was expected of me. You know, it's there, it's clearly outlined in black and white, and they've signed it. Circulate the final draft once it's complete with the final budget and get sign off. Allow time for proofing. We've touched on that. Allow time for Access Europe review. If you want, you can send it to us and we will review it, and we will help to make sure that, you know, you're maximizing your points, and you've got that good European dimension, all of that kind of stuff. And then submission. So again, this is echoing what Noel said earlier. So allow plenty of time, as much time as possible, particularly if you're new to it. Flag technical issues early and record evidence. So if you are having issues with the platform, which does happen, it's not the most technologically advanced system in the world, take screenshots, lodge them with the help desk for the Commission early, so that they can see, oh, okay, there's some kind of issue, because they can, if it's a problem on their end, they can find alternate ways for you to submit your application. Make sure you have all your relevant, make sure you have all your kind of ducks in a row in terms of the essential information you need, like OID numbers. Save proof of submission, final versions, and any other evidence to show that it was submitted. Tidy your files and keep your partners informed. So that's it. We are going to look at a work package example now in a minute, but just to recap on where we are now. So, you know, we've covered all these steps. In the first one, we looked at steps 1 to 4, designing your project. Then in step 5 was last week, we focused on building your partnership. And today we've covered the last 3 steps. So we'll have time for Q&A now, but while I'm waiting, I might just quickly show you what that work package kind of thing will look like. So this is what I put together. So this is why I couldn't fit this into a slide. So I just copied and pasted from the actual application. This is what it looks like, the work package. So this is where they want you to translate everything that you said into a work plan. So I just explained that I give a very general example of an extremely general, I mean, this isn't specific to any type of a project, example of a work package. Always read all of the instructions, but I've highlighted some of the important ones, and I've put some tips in red. Just some other kind of guidance information. I'm not going to go through all of that now. And just to be very clear that this is just an example. This isn't the only way to structure your project. This is just our way of structuring your project, and that we can help you. If you want to reach out to Access Europe, we can help you to structure your own unique project in your way. But you can see that I kind of filled in all the sections, put in with like just example text, and filled in all these with some little tips and things like that. So this is just an example of how it'll work, and you'll be able to have a look at that. We'll send it around afterwards, and you'll be able to have a look at, you know, what a work package might look like. So that's it. We are relatively on time. We've still got a good while for if you have any questions. There's only a small group, so feel free to just turn on your cameras and mics and ask questions if you like. Or, I don't know, over to you, Cormac. Do you have any questions or anything?
Well, you know, just to say thank you, number one. I mean, you've covered a huge amount of stuff, and to be honest, like you know, there's obviously a fair amount of I suppose just reiterating the same points again, you know, so I think it's well drilled at this stage. I'm from a personal point of view, just looking at this from a sport body point of view, I hope we haven't made it too complicated looking. That's a concern I would nearly look at. I mean, obviously, I think for large projects, this, you know, you need to be really well organized, as Noel has laid out there, I think very well in his case study. You know, you need to be really well organized if you've got 10 partners working on a project and you're presenting that. I think it's a lot easier if there's only 2 partners on a small project. And so I think it's very important for people to think about that. Like, I mean, you know, it's probably handier for you to jump onto a project initially and let someone else basically do the lead work and do the main, you know, or else think about this in a small project initially. You know, don't bite off too much too soon. So that's my only observation on it. I don't know whether some of the I'd like to hear, of course, from any of the sporting bodies around. Have they got projects? What are they thinking? And you know, any questions? You know, of course, you know. Derek, Myra, Sarah, Diane.
Just from my point of view, no, it's all good. It's my first time. I'm only with Rowing Ireland for a year. I am actually involved with the Rose project that you mentioned on one of the first weeks. So I'm working with Clare Sports Partnership. I'm involved with Get Going Get Rowing at the moment. So it's a good one. It's a good we're
one
actually
to
heading
cut
over
your teeth on.
Yes, yeah, and as I said, I'm just a small. This is my first taste of it, but we're heading over to Nantes in France in the end of November for a couple of days with our French counterparts over there to kind of continue working on the project. So, yeah, this is just giving me a little bit more of a kind of a little bit more knowledge as to
And so I suppose just from is there anything resonating with you here from a rowing point of view? Obviously, participation is your agenda. Social inclusion might be your agenda. Maybe it's older adults. Maybe it's disability. Maybe it's women in sport. These are all, if you like,
all of the above.
Things that are fairly topical policy areas, of course, in the sporting area. And of course, then, if you look beyond that, you look at what is power, what can rowing deliver, if you like, how can it, if you like, tap in on certainly the social inclusion dimension, but then you have other policy areas that Europe is looking at. It is a smarter Europe, it is a greener Europe. So these are dimensions that you'll be thinking about also in as well as the participation. Probably the youth participation, or indeed, as you said, you're already working in the disability space under the Rose project,
Yes, yeah, no, yeah, definitely all of the above. It gives me scope to have a look at kind of broaden the horizons and look at other ideas. Like even with the Rose project, we're kind of bringing in the environment into it as well, and that's one of the ticking the boxes for the Erasmus Plus as well. So yeah, no, all good.
Yeah, great stuff. Brendan, Myra, Sarah down there I see, and Diane, you're all coming from different sports.
Yeah. No, go ahead, Brendan.
Sorry, I'm in a small gymnastic club. We're just actually along the border, and some of our members and our coaches are from across the border.
Yes.
But I'm kind of a bit late in that I missed the earlier session, so I'm not even too sure.
Your head is spinning, so Brendan, you're probably going, what the hell is all this about?
Well, I've been just doing a leader one, so I'm kind of looking at leader as well.
Yeah, just to maybe say, Brendan, that there are other programs, European programs that might be maybe, and it's something that I was speaking to Christina about there earlier in the week, and there are opportunities for what's called mobility and training exchange programs between coaches, youth groups, and indeed maybe grassroots type clubs. These come in under another strand of Erasmus, under the education, youth and vocational education training end of it. So these are things that may also be of interest, of course, to sport clubs at a local level,
How do you get, even for what you're talking about here, is there an application form? Are there dates? Are there deadlines? I've missed maybe.
Well, it's definitely joining events like this. It's becoming registering with Access Europe.ie, the Wheels platform. So being just tuned in to what's happening, and also within the Irish context, Lergus is an excellent national coordinating body for Erasmus programs. So go check out the Lergus website, and they also run kind of awareness raising events similar to what the Wheel do and the Access Europe team do in the Wheel.
Yeah, I would say that the next deadlines for Erasmus Plus Sport, I think, are set for around April, is it? They were delayed this year because it was a brand new program. So I think it should be around April. So this is a really good time if you are considering preparing an application to start, in terms of maybe identifying partners and thinking about how you might collaborate, because so much time goes into that planning phase, and the more time you can invest in that, the better. so that the kind of pressure is off then when it comes to writing and you're not, you know, tight to a deadline. So yeah, you can aim for that. And I think sign up for our newsletters. So, and we give monthly updates in terms of what are all the deadlines that are coming up and information sessions and advice and resources and stuff. So we do that kind of research for you. And then if you, and there's a link there where you can easily join us and sign up for that. Emily just put it in the chat. And then kind of reach out to us. If you're interested in developing an application, reach out to us and we can help mentor you through that process. And I suppose for Erasmus Plus, you're looking at the sport, and then there is also then the Lergus side of things. They deal with general education and mobilities and exchanges and stuff like that, that can have a sport element to them, but they, you know, they're also wider than that. And then also another program to look at is, it's not out yet, but if it is North-South collaboration, the Peace program. So you've probably heard of Peace, and that's going to be released. It's supposed to be released in January. So let's see if it comes out anyway. Yeah, Peace Plus now, because it's absorbed one of the Interreg programs, so it's now a plus program. So yeah, so that'll be due out soon, and there should be opportunities through that, particularly for sport. I think is a really nice example for Peace. Yeah, in terms of leader, the other thing is if you're looking at things like capital projects, for example, or kind of more local projects where you don't want to do that kind of European collaboration or it wouldn't add value, then you are looking at leader. And we have a series that we've done on leader, a 3-part series on what is leader, how to prepare a leader application, what supports are available, and we can forward those links to everybody. What is in the chat now, actually, there's a YouTube channel where we recorded or a YouTube series where we recorded all of that, but we can include it in the follow-up as well, so everybody will have access to that, because that's another avenue for sports at a more local community development kind of side of things.
Oh, okay. Have we got any just questions, guys, there just before we kind of come to a conclusion? I'm just very conscious that there's a lot of information been given. And so this is the concluding piece, of course, of a 3-part series. And so I think that the team will obviously be circulating some slides and a few other resources to you via email and stuff. But any specific, if you've got a project in your mind at the moment, obviously the concept note, writing it down, getting the ball moving is a crucial first step, and to obviously then connecting with the Access team to help, if you like, communicate the concept note and develop that and see where it goes. You know, I think that's a logical first step. Diane, Sarah, anybody else? Anyone got any questions there on projects or thoughts that are in your head?
Hi everyone, just thanks for a great workshop. Emma and Emily, I know we've been in contact during the week, and I can't wait for our meeting next week. But the question I have is, I would assume a lot of the components that you talked about today, which were great, would be similar to what's in the kind of adult ed applications. Yeah, I just wanted to know. And also, any idea of
any idea of what was it?
Of the next deadline for that call?
Oh, yeah. So they'll usually be out in the next couple of months. Generally, it's around end of March or early April. That was according to previous programs. Now, this year it wasn't until the 20th of May, but that's because everything was delayed because of COVID, and the program itself wasn't released until April. So it was horrible because it was like a 6-week window to actually write your project. This time around, it won't be like that. If they do it the way previous years have done it, it'll be late March, early April for adult ed or vocational education training. And we do have a template. Now, it's kind of a template that we made ourselves and kind of cobbled together internally for a Word document, because for that one, you do have to fill it in online into a platform. And you know yourself, if you've ever used any of them, they're not the friendliest things to type into and to try and, you know, it is handy to have a document to work off of. So we have a template for that we can share with you as well.
Emma, the best website to get information on the calls that are coming up, and you know, I suppose you might call it, you've got different strands here. You've obviously got Erasmus, and you've got the different elements of Erasmus. Then you've got some of the other Peace programs and various other Interreg and whatever, all of these type of things. Is there any, for Ireland, is there any single website that basically carries all of these, all of the information?
There is one called eufunds.ie. That's relatively new, and I don't know whether it covers everything. Honestly, our website is the one that ties it together for Ireland, and it's probably the easiest ones because we also send you the newsletter, so you don't even have to remember to check in on it. You just sign up to our newsletter and we'll do it for you. And we have a specific sports section on our website as well. Yeah. So I mean, that's probably the easiest bet. And then you can kind of reach out to it. If you see one, just send us a link and say, do you think this would be right for my project? And we can have a look at it for you and let you know, is this a goer or not, kind of thing. So yeah, that's probably the best thing. But there is eufunds.ie, which is more, that's kind of catch-all for everything, for all, you know, whether it's local authorities or universities
ESF,
or anything.
ESF plus or
you know,
ERDF, all the bigger programs.
Yeah. Whereas ours kind of hones in more on kind of the community voluntary sector and then the wider civil sector kind of thing. So it's more tailored to that.
Okay.
So,
okay, great stuff.
Great.
You know, just to say thanks again to Noel for sharing his case study, and best luck to him on his project. And of course, we're lucky we had 2 other case studies and a few other contributors. And you know, just from a Sport Ireland point of view, thanks to the Access Europe team in the wheel, Emma, Emily, and Christina for pulling this and delivering all of this information to us. It's been fantastic, invaluable, and really a pity probably that we didn't have a bigger number participating. But it's a busy time of year for sporting bodies. You know, there's a lot going on in Q4 for a lot of sporting bodies at the moment, be it just the regular run-of-the-mill stuff, you know. Yeah, so look at, I don't know whether, Emma, do you guys want to say anything, but from our end, it's just thank you.
Great. But I think we got the people who were most committed, that stayed with us for the whole and are most serious about making an application. That's good. It was always going to whittle down. There was like 40 people subscribed, so they'll receive the recording and everything, and this will be recorded and you'll receive that as follow-up, so you'll be able to watch bits and pieces back, which I think will be helpful sometimes. So just to say thank you. I think, you know, we just put our information there into the chat, so I think that's really it, isn't it, Emily and Christina?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, because I know some people hadn't been receiving the follow-up, but I know that I also get the follow-up and it keeps going to my junk. So if you feel like I haven't sent it, just check your junk and it might be in there.
Yeah, and if you don't receive it for any reason, just reach out to us and we can forward it to you directly. So that's great. Thank you all so much. Really excited to see what you do with your projects, and come back to us and we can help you through the process. So, you know, you've made it this far. We can get you there to the end, and as Cormac said, it really isn't as complicated as it looks, and you know, there's loads of support there. So okay, that's it. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a good rest of your day.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone.